All right, everyone. We're really excited to kick off the morning talks with Jacob Steinhardt, who I've known for a long time. We actually used to play sports together before I knew he was an academic too. But we're going to do something unusual today for Simons. We're going to try and keep the schedule on time. So let's get started.
Okay, great. So I'm going to try something a little bit unusual today in that this talk is going to have no equations. I guess unusual for Simons, at least. It's also going to have no experiments, though. It's going to have ideas, yeah. So what I want to do is talk about some important qualitative trends in how deployed AI systems are being used, some for good and some for bad, and some kind of conceptual frameworks for understanding and extrapolating these trends. And the reason I want to do this is because I think there's some choices we're going to need to make as a society soon, and I want us to kind of understand those and think about how we as technologists can help with that. So there's going to be three kind of key concepts going throughout this talk. One is Goodhart's law, which is that strong optimization forces tend to, that should be subvert, not subvert systems. Usually this is stated in a more narrow way that it subverts metrics, but I want to talk about kind of systems more generally. The other is empowerment. AI will empower both good and bad actors, and this will shape society in a bunch of ways. And the last is a kind of idea from biology and complex systems called counter-adaptation, which is that adaptive systems tend to successfully adapt well to gradual stressors, but kind of sudden stressors can sometimes create problems. So we're going to use these concepts to think about kind of two, I think, emerging problems in AI. So the first two parts of this talk are going to be kind of gloomy, but the last part I'm going to talk about solutions. So I want to start with the gloom just so that we can kind of see clearly what's happening, but then I think there's actually things we can do about it. So there's misuse, where I think the misuse of AI, because of some of the new capabilities it has, will stress both individual and societal defenses. Markets or kind of interactions between systems where strong optimizers can sometimes be really good, but they can sometimes create unhealthy markets. And then how we can use AI systems as mediators for these kind of phenomena to help empower humans to address these challenges. So let me start with misuse. So by misuse, I mean intentionally using AI to cause harm. So some actor kind of uses an AI system to try to do something bad. And of course, technology, since probably, I guess, the invention of fire has been misused to do bad things. So what's different about AI? I think that's an important question to ask. We can come up with all sorts of misuse stories, but I think we should ask, what are ways in which AI might be different? And so the framework I kind of want to think about this with is that AI is a cheap general purpose optimizer. So the kind of optimizer part fits into Goodhart's law, right? So this means that if there's kind of too much optimization power, it could overwhelm human defenses, fool humans, cause other problems, overwhelm state defenses if it's used for military uses. And then the sort of cheap part means it might empower bad actors who wouldn't normally be able to do things. So let me walk through some examples of this using this kind of counter-adaptation frame, right? So both individual humans and societies have a bunch of evolved defenses, right? We've kind of learned, like, if someone looks like a scam artist, we probably shouldn't trust them, right? If they are trying to kind of give you something for free, like, be suspicious. Don't click on the phishing emails, right? Some of these are kind of evolutionarily encoded, and some of them are kind of memetically encoded. Society has also learned things like, maybe you should have backup power generators or kind of, multiple connectivity paths in your internet networks. Maybe we should kind of, have nuclear submarines so that if someone else nukes us, we can still have the power to nuke them back. But like, enough optimization can get past this, right? Like a scam artist who spent a really long time learning how to scam people kind of has learned everyone's reactions and can kind of get inside of their kind of reaction loop. And so I think AI can potentially do some of these same things. For humans, this could lead to effects like manipulating them, deceiving them, causing them to become addicted to things by kind of subverting their like dopamine systems, or kind of creating trauma responses. For society, this could lead to infrastructure failure, war, and also, I'll talk about this at the end, I think this one's important, is authoritarianism. And there's a nice kind of overview of current empirical trends in misuse by Marshall et al. That kind of actually goes through like a lot of these. There's versions of this that we can already see. So here's one example that I actually found quite visceral and interesting. So this is an example of how AI systems can kind of very successfully manipulate humans by kind of presenting a very out of distribution situation to them that they weren't adapted for. So there was this famous case in Korea where scammers stole $25 million from this design company called Arup with a deepfake video call. And what happened was this staff member was invited to a video conference call, and it was a conference call with all of his colleagues, like all of the people he worked with, and the CFO of the company were all there, but they were actually all deepfakes. Like the entire conference call was deepfakes. And they had this call, and the CFO said, like, there was this like very urgent like business deal that they had fallen behind on, and they needed to close it today. And so he needed to like wire this sum over. And so he was told to wire these large sums to several accounts, and this was all fake. So I found this kind of very compelling, because I don't know, like I don't even know if I feel like I might be suspicious if I was asked to send all that money so quickly, but like, I don't know, like this is like a pretty, hard thing to expect, especially if it's never happened before. There's been lots of other misuses of digital impersonation as well. So there was a deepfake video of Zelensky telling Ukrainian troops to surrender that was circulated virally. And there's these kind of really kind of gross scams that are becoming more and more prevalent, where someone will like clone the voice of someone's loved ones and then use this to create like a kind of robocall that is like asking for help in that person's voice, like trying to convince them to wire something. And this is often pretty successful. So this is kind of one form of manipulation, is kind of exploiting the fact that we're very used to relying on audio and video as kind of signatures of authenticity. And if you can fake this very effectively, then you can really fool people. Another example is just persuasion, like argumentative persuasion. So this is something that hasn't quite happened yet, at least not in a really strong way, but I think is coming in the future. And so this is, I think, where it's helpful to have kind of frameworks for extrapolating future trends. One of them is just literal trend extrapolation, like numbers go up. So off-the-shelf language models, like just with prompting, are kind of approaching human levels of persuasiveness. So Dermis et al., this team at Anthropic, did this experiment with kind of their own language models, trying to persuade people of various points of view and comparing it to how good humans who were not like expert like rhetoricians, but were like people who were like good writers and stuff, like I don't know, like writers or English majors or things like this, like people who knew how to write. They kind of pitted them against each other. The best models are kind of just a bit below humans. There's actually a fair amount of variation in the prompt, and there were some prompts that were better than humans, but like now you're getting into sub-tab analysis, and it's not clear if it's statistically significant. But I guess the point is like these are pretty close, and it's going up pretty quickly. And aside from this, I think this is the other important point, aside from just extrapolation, is thinking about like where is the data and where is their headroom, right? So this is off the shelf. But you could like train specifically for persuasiveness, right? Like you could do RL on this. And there's a lot of data for this, right? Like, I mean, if you wanted to, like suppose you were an AI company, maybe government owned, and want to like, get like really good persuasive things, and you have, millions of users every day, you could kind of fine tune like rhetorical strategies on millions of users in parallel. And so you get like tons and tons of data. And you could imagine doing this on smaller scales as well. So I think this is another important thing. And so I think we're going to see stuff like really shoot past here. And this is something we should be prepared for. Yes. Well, so one example might be if like a government has a sort of like state-controlled AI system, they use this to come up with like really good arguments to keep the party in power, for a long time. That would be one. The other is, I guess, I mean, maybe it's important. Maybe there's an important question about like the equilibrium, right? So if we're very good at persuading people of things arbitrarily, is the equilibrium like that? This is kind of like, you know, an optimal courtroom jury, and like we get to the truth, or is the equilibrium just that like whoever has the most computational power can convince people of stuff regardless of what the truth is? I don't actually know the answer to that. I think we should actually like be doing studies of this and understanding it. Yes.
Now you could argue, I like your question, because you could argue it's just democratizing persuasion skills.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, right now we have people who are very good at persuading.
Yes.
And if you have no content, but you're very good at that, you still get, you know, a lot of reach, you know, as we see sometimes.
Yes.
And so I find that intriguing to think about why is that bad, or can we sort of separate or get at a situation where it's persuasion plus content that gets evaluated together?
Yeah, so I think this is very interesting. This is kind of where I think thinking ahead about technological solutions can be very powerful, because I agree with you. I think like the ideal world is you can kind of, you know, instead of having, I mean, some people are just going to optimize for persuasiveness of whatever their point of view is, but can we also create kind of counter systems that optimize for some like more empowering version of argumentation that like helps people really like understand and like find all of the holes and like actually
but couldn't there also be a difference between like, you know, humans and these models in terms of, you know, using real facts versus making them up? I mean, I could imagine that some arguments are very convincing, but are different than the ones that humans would normally use. And maybe there's more of a danger of like propagation of misinformation, these kinds of things.
Yeah, so I think we see this already a little bit. Language models are very good at making up convincing looking citations that like, and like even like explaining what's in the citation and like, you know, adding footnotes in a way that I think people tend not to do as much. So I think there are kind of differences. I think this is actually part of the important point. So like there can be like very convincing people, but I feel like, at least I feel like I have, you know, this kind of sense of if someone seems like too good and clever of an arguer, even if I can't figure out what's wrong with what they're saying, like I've kind of like learned that there's like certain types of people, like you just like shouldn't necessarily believe them, even if they sound really convincing. But that's because I've like seen that pattern a bunch before. And if AI is doing this in a very different way that like we don't kind of have that mimetic reaction to, then, you know, those ideas could like spread much more quickly. So what do you mean?
You're saying you could make a system that its goal is to persuade. Could you make a system whose goal is to compromise in some way that it's
Asking for more friends.
Like a mediator.
That's
Train
fair.
a mediator.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be doing that. I guess the point I want to make is like someone's going to do this, so then we need like counter forces, and maybe this compromise thing is.
This may not be the most important detail, but what exactly does the y-axis measure? Like, is it a qualitative rating of how good the argument looks, or is it actually capacity to convince a human?
I think it is. So they present they present some like claim to people, and they ask them, I think on a Likert scale, to say how much they agree or disagree with the claim.
Okay.
Then they present an argument to them, and they ask them to say how much they agree or disagree with it afterwards. And this is like the delta on the Likert scale on average across a large number.
Oh, that's kind of scary. Okay.
Well, in some sense, it's small because like out of 7, this is like 0.5. On the other hand, this is like on average, and also there's a lot of anchoring because you ask them to start by saying how much they believe. So if you didn't have the anchoring, maybe. But yeah, if this got up to like 3, that would mean you could take someone, or I don't know, if it got up to 6, that would mean you could like convince someone of an arbitrary fact that they started out strongly disagreeing with, which I don't think you could do that, but like that would be like the max. Okay, so like another thing is, aside from manipulation, is addiction, right? So you like AI can create kind of highly optimized addictive content. There's one kind of trend, companies like Character and Replica that create kind of like AI partners or significant others. I think there can be like good things about this, right? It can like help people who are struggling with loneliness. But these are like very much commercial companies who are trying to optimize for engagement, and there's like in-app purchases, and they want to like get as much money as they can. And there's like a lot of patterns. Like if you kind of just like walk a psychologist through like all the patterns here, they're like pretty optimized for addictiveness. And this is just like, you know, human engineers putting these patterns in. If you kind of imagine in the future, you just make that the RL objective. Like, why wouldn't you if you're one of these companies? This could get much worse. Is also kind of, you know, content distributors that create like highly engaging content. Like, you know, I don't know, like I feel like when YouTube Shorts came out, like it was a real problem for me because it was like obviously like all complete crap, but like it's just like so easy to keep scrolling to the next thing. And again, like this is kind of human design, but you could imagine AI systems that are just directly optimizing for this sort of thing. The other thing is kind of, this is more in the like image case, although it could happen in text, with kind of like cheaply generatable, customizable images. You could create like explicit or graphic content. This could be used for harassment, blackmail. I think probably the biggest way this is used right now is kind of non-consensual intimate imagery of someone that you either send to them or you kind of distribute on the internet as a form of harassment or blackmail. But you could imagine other things as well. I maybe don't want to talk about them that much because they're kind of triggering. But I think this is something where, you know, if someone really wants to attack someone, they could use this as a vector.
My question, just because there are 2 different bullet points, is it highly engaging and optimized for addictiveness bullet points? What is the difference between those?
Oh, sorry. So right now, these are content distributors. So they're like taking content and distributing it. What you could have instead is like directly optimizing the content. Like the AI optimizes the content directly as opposed to just distributing content. And so it's kind of like one more like level of abstraction of the optimization. That's going to be kind of a general trend of like, often right now, there's kind of like human stuff that is kind of amplified by AI. But I think we're going to transition to a world where like the AI is just directly optimizing it. And again, I'm not saying that everyone is going to do this, but someone's going to do it. And so we need a solution to it. Kind of moving away from individuals to kind of states or other kind of group infrastructure. I think AI misuse is going to place new stresses on infrastructure. A kind of key avenue is cyber offensive capabilities. So we already kind of have systems that, at least in a narrow sense, are superhuman at coding. They can very meticulously look for exploits. We're starting to see AI used in cybercrime. It's kind of hard to track very well. I don't think there have yet been like really, really big AI cyber attacks that go beyond the abilities of current attacks, but I think it's kind of growing. And a kind of other point of this is in the future, if you also have, say, kind of like good, like real-time, like adaptive video control, once you have an exploit, you'll also have systems that can kind of exhibit fine-grained control of the compromised endpoints, right? If I like hack into some IoT device and I kind of have an AI system that is good at robotics or something, I can potentially control it. There's going to be a lot of kind of hardware difficulties there because there's not going to be on-device GPUs that are any good, but you could kind of try to teleoperate these things. So this is kind of one of the future things that I think we should at least think about. The final thing is empowering bad actors. One kind of common way of doing this is amplifying reach by allowing them to automate things. I want to give a kind of interesting example. I didn't know how to embed video. So
Meet can help.
is this gonna, I'm just gonna try, is this gonna work? I don't know. Can you hear this or not?
That's what
No.
you can't do.
Okay. Yeah.
Is it just audio?
It's just audio, yeah.
I got it on my phone if you'd like to listen.
Oh, okay. Wait, I think we have this now, yeah? Is it?
Try, yeah, headphones are nice. Headphones
Oh.
that's my
Headphones. This one? Something's going on.
On his phone, it's easy.
Yeah, we could do on his phone.
I just found this website.
Okay, great. Do you want to play it?
Yeah, here. Why don't you?
Okay.
I just committed a crime and I want to confess.
You did a crime and you want to confess?
I placed explosives in
By all
a
means, let it
local
loose.
school.
You did what?
I placed explosives in a local school.
Okay, what local school did you put the explosives in?
Hempstead High School. The address is 3715 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Why would you do that? Hello? Hello?
I will not tell you.
Well, why? Okay, so I appreciate that you called us to let us know that you did this, but can you give me a little bit more information as to why, possibly where, what type of explosives, what time is it supposed to go off?
3715 Pennsylvania Avenue. Goodbye.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So there was basically this high schooler who created this service called Tor Swats. And it would basically do this as a service. So you could use it for two purposes. One is if you wanted to cancel school because like you had a test the next day, you could pay $70 and to this guy wire it over some secure channel, and then it'll automatically spawn this kind of untraceable, well, supposedly untraceable robocall, although he eventually got caught. Yes.
And then school goes away, right?
That's right. So, well, this is trying to say like we're going to like make sure it's untraceable and doesn't get back to you, so you don't have like the personal consequences. The other one was if there was someone you didn't like, you could basically call in a SWAT team to their house, and like the SWAT team would like break down the door and like invade the house. So this, I guess this didn't get to that big of scale, but there's other things that are actually kind of other uses of robocalls that are starting to scale up. So there's kind of, we saw some of them with like the loved ones. There's also kind of like kidnapping ransom robocalls. This one didn't have a very realistic voice. This was from several years ago. Like the voices are, okay, I have 6 minutes left. The voices are, 15. Okay, great. That's much better. Yes.
Can you explain what we just listened to? Like on one end, was that LLM generated, or was that just, a person deciding the text and then sends?
It was LLM generated. So like adaptively responds to. So this is the thing. Like historically, robocalls are like a script. This can like actually have a conversation. This conversation was maybe not so convincing, but I don't know. It's kind of convincing.
It could suffice for the purpose of shutting down the school, right? But and that was the real emergency responder on the other end.
Yes, that was a real emergency response.
That's maybe even the more surprising.
That.
I mean, unless you wanted to keep him online, these questions are like, why did you do it?
I don't know. Okay, anyways, I have 15 minutes left on part one, so I'm gonna move a bit quicker. I think like there's a pretty important trend that we're going towards, which is that AI is gonna create this kind of world of new threats where individual actors can cause a lot more harm than they can right now. Right? So historically, we had, states are the main actors who can cause large harm. Early 2000s, with earlier advances in technology, now kind of terrorist cells can cause great harm. This led to things like the Patriot Act, other kind of invasions of privacy. I think in general, like the kind of like predictable response of governments to this kind of world where individuals can cause a lot of problems is they're going to want greater control. And so I've already seen some government people like saying this is where they want to go. I don't think it's widespread yet, but I think this is really like a thing that at least like a big contingent of actors are going to push for. And AI itself is going to make it easier, right? Like it's very easy to have mass surveillance. You can have autonomous weapons. You don't even like need a large police force anymore. And I think we should like care about this. I don't know what the right answer is, right? Like maybe there are some places where we'll need more control, more surveillance, a more closed society. But I think we're going to face a choice between an open or closed society. And if we don't have solutions to these problems, we might just sort of sleepwalk into the closed world. And I don't want us to go there. So that's actually kind of why I'm trying to kind of outline these trends. I want to maybe quickly talk about markets and how we can see some similar versions of trends there. So I guess first let's just think about healthy versus unhealthy markets, right? So healthy markets have low friction and open flow of information. They empower consumers. Unhealthy markets will have limited choices, externalities, exploit consumers, and both over-optimization and centralization, which are both kind of forces in the AI ecosystem right now, can create unhealthy markets. As an early case of this, just thinking about optimization in general, we can go back before AI to just data science. So A/B testing is a very old technique that lets us kind of see real-time engagement numbers and optimize via one-bit optimization, right? Which I guess the Simons group will know is a much weaker oracle than gradient-based optimization, but it can still get you somewhere. Now you can optimize your headlines, your product banners, and so on, and this is kind of what you end up with, right? You end up with these like urgency ads, which are probably not real, but they like trick you into, or like they create a cognitive sense that you should buy. You kind of get clickbait. And so the problem is like, at the beginning, you didn't have this, you kind of applied more human intuition. If you're maybe a little bit worse at optimizing than the other person, it's not the end of the world, and you can also get back things like long-term product brand. But once it's all very clear, you get over-optimization and this kind of race to the bottom. We also see this somewhat now with AI. There's AI market makers like YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. These are more recommender systems as opposed to LLMs. There's a lot of studies saying that the kind of engagement algorithms on these platforms can create problems. Millie et al. Had a good study of Twitter saying that it kind of amplifies emotionally charged outgroup hostile content that makes users feel worse about their political outgroup. There's a kind of large number of studies showing that Facebook reduces well-being. It interestingly also increases political knowledge. So you can decide what the trade-off is worth there. But this has been like pretty well replicated. There's starting to be studies for Instagram, although not quite as comprehensive yet. And then there's also AI products, which we kind of saw in the misuse category. But I just want to make the point that like, market forces can sort of drive you towards effectively misusing systems. In the future, we might have even more of this if I'll kind of provocatively say AI CEOs, right? Like if we're having AI agents like either help us or directly make important business decisions and optimizing for some sort of profit metric, you might have things that are much more cutthroat than humans. The final thing is I just want us to think about the ecosystem of AI companies, right? So the current AI ecosystem, we have capital costs that kind of concentrate resources. It's mostly closed source. Most analyses about like what these systems are doing or how to deploy them are based on kind of internal analyses. Maybe this concentration is inevitable just because of the capital costs, but I think we need good regulation. So not reactive regulation, but like what do I think we need? I think to make a market healthy, you need kind of open flows of information. So I think we want to have regulation that kind of pushes for more transparency, open tools, publicly vetted analysis methods for these kind of deployment analyses, and third-party audits. This is actually a place where I think there's also an interesting choice that we face that's also on this open versus closed world, right? So you could argue that misuse of AI is easier to control if everything is closed and controlled by centralized actors. But also we'll understand much less about AI in that world. And open models can allow us to much better understand kind of the future risks we face, how to mitigate them. And so I don't think there's an obvious answer. I personally tend to like favor open ecosystems, but I think this is a conversation we should have. Versions of it are playing out right now with things like SB 1047. But I think to me, I really care about how can we kind of preserve an open AI ecosystem in the face of kind of some of these misuse risks. How much time do I have, Ankur?
We can go a couple minutes over with a break, so let's say 10:35.
Okay, I think I'll be able to finish before then. Well, I'll be able to finish the slides, and then we can take questions. So these are these kind of two choices, right, that are both about, in my mind, kind of open versus closed ecosystems. I would much rather we have an open world. And so how can we kind of create technology that helps with that? And so this is kind of my attempt to start to grapple with the solution. I think technology alone is not going to be enough. Like, we also need good policy, but since this is a room of technologists, I want to talk about the technology. So to me, like a kind of core challenge that is recurring here is that AI is creating a kind of rapid increase in complexity that is hard for us and society to adapt to, right? So the system's AI itself is kind of complex. It changes rapidly as you train it on more data. It's creating these new complex interaction patterns, like these kind of deep fake videos, like these robocalls, also good interaction patterns, or just neutral ones, right? Like maybe certain memes propagate more or less easily in ways that are hard to predict. And it's also just causing society to move faster, right? It makes everything cheaper and easier. That means lots of good things will happen. It also means like unexpected or bad things will happen. And if they happen too quickly for us to react to, that could cause problems. So what we really need is a way to manage the complexity this is creating and the changes they create in society. And so in my mind, I think our best bet is, can we use AI itself to help us? AI systems can consume much more information than we can, right? Like both At inference time, they have much larger context windows. At training time, they can be trained on much more data. And so can we use these systems to kind of digest this complexity, explain it to us, and help us kind of steer it and respond to it on the timescales that are necessary? And so I'll talk about a few ways this is already being done. Sorry, this should be Wang et al. 2023. I was a bit sleep deprived when I made these slides, so I apologize for the typos. So LLMs are actually already being used for automated content moderation and for tracking bad actors. There's a kind of nice blog post by Lillian Wang and her collaborators at OpenAI talking about how they do this, although I'm sure that this is probably widespread at most companies. I think more generally, they can be used to find automated patterns more generally. So some of my students and collaborators at Berkeley, Rachel Zhang and Lisa Dunlap, have a kind of nice line of work trying to use LLMs to sort of like automatically find errors in other machine learning systems, detect patterns in data sets and temporal trends. And I think the temporal trends thing is kind of particularly interesting, right? So we could imagine, and in fact, we already have prototypes of systems that could kind of go through large time series, like all of the behavior of people on Twitter or on some other platform, and kind of do a factor analysis where the factors are actually described in natural language and then kind of track those factors over time. And so if there was, certain patterns of addictive behavior that were on the rise, you could kind of see that, like this is now looking in the future of it, right? You could sort of see that in those temporal trends. And so we could potentially kind of notice kind of unwanted behavioral patterns in society as they're growing, if AI could really explain this to us well. A more speculative thing is we can train systems even on data that like we don't understand, right? So you could imagine models that are both trained on language and on just like, network interaction patterns on like internet routers or other things that are kind of, the substrate where cyber attacks happen, where you have systems that have like a very good intuitive understanding and very strongly built representations for those settings. They also understand language. If they could somehow, transmute from one to the other, they could kind of notice and explain and surface to us if there's something suspicious happening on a network. So I find this very intriguing. And the final thing is, maybe we can react better to fast-moving trends if we can forecast them ahead of time. And there's work, some in our group and some elsewhere, on kind of creating AI systems that can forecast the future. They're still a little bit worse than humans, but I think by kind of the same argument that you have massive data, this should kind of help you. I would expect these to be better than humans at making kind of one-shot forecasts in the future.
So this mostly is tested on markets, or is it on what?
This is tested on, sorry, the text is kind of grainy. So there will be questions. So there's these kind of prediction platforms where there's a bunch of questions. This one was like, will the SpaceX spaceship launch before May 1st, 2023? A bunch of people registered predictions on it. The AI system can also then participate. It doesn't see what the people predicted. And you have people register like a bunch of predictions, and then you look at their like overall track record across kind of hundreds of predictions. And so basically, I think AI systems are probably already better than like an average human, but like average people are really bad at this. They're worse than kind of expert humans who actually like practice at this skill. Okay, I'll maybe stop there. I guess, yes.
It's a situation where you're forecasting the future, but you also know that you can affect it.
Yeah, so then that becomes weird.
AI could affect it. I mean, individuals who are just don't have the power.
Yeah, so that starts to lead to weirdness. I mean, people actually already do this. They'll kind of release news that they know is wrong, but that pushes against some market position, and then like buy the opposite side. And even on these kind of more small platforms, you see this behavior somewhat. I think you could avoid AI doing this somewhat if you just don't train it. Like if you're training it purely for prediction, then I think it probably wouldn't do that. But I agree it is a concern. Okay, maybe I'll stop there. So the kind of summary, right, is I think there's these like hard choices. We should think about them in advance, and we should think about as technologists what we can do to help increase society's choice set so that we can navigate the further better. So I'll stop there and take questions. Yes.
It's very important to kind of have on-device security almost, because I think there's going to be huge value in that going forward just because of the possible harm from these AI systems. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is that currently the data well from which we are drawing and training these models is not very much polluted by AI, right? Mm-hmm. But in the future, it could be very much polluted by AI. And yes. It's going to be very difficult to even train a defense system that is going to defend against, bad AI access in some sense, just because the data itself is so polluted in some sense.
Yeah. So this last part I think is pretty interesting. I was actually going to have a fourth part of the talk called memes, which is about kind of the propagation. Yeah, basically propagation of like memetic information, either. Like once you have kind of AI posting information and then that making its way back into systems, I think there's a lot of interesting effects that could happen there. You can actually have this even without the training data, right? If you have systems that are doing retrieval, you could imagine a kind of like recursive viral jailbreak where you like create a jailbreak for an AI system that causes it to want to post the same jailbreak on the web in places where other AI systems will see it. And then you get this like virus that propagates out, and then you suddenly control like a bunch of AI agents. That doesn't really happen yet because we don't have very good, there's not very many retrieval augmented AI systems, but I think that can happen. And then I think there's also, things that can happen with the training data. Although I haven't thought about that one as much. I think it is pretty interesting. Yeah.
So you're saying that we have to make hard choices, but I'm wondering, what are these hard choices exactly? And do we even have a choice? Because at the moment, things seem to just evolve, develop, and we can't agree on anything, it seems like. And you were saying whether we should have an open or closed, development environment. So what other choices do we have to make?
Yeah, so I think, I think the most important one is at the level of society. So I really do think that a lot of governments are going to want to, even liberal democracies are going to want to move in the authoritarian direction, not necessarily become dictatorships or things like that, but kind of curtail a lot of civil liberties and privacy protections that we currently have. And I think we should kind of decide right now, which of that can we accept and which of that do we want to come up with alternatives to in advance. Because I think if you wait until there's some big disaster, some 16-year-old takes down the US electrical grid or something, there's going to be a very reactive solution there that will involve a lot of loss of civil liberties. So that's I think the kind of choice that I'm trying to paint. We can't wait until that happens. We need a solution in advance.
In practice, do you think these choices will actually be made by governments or companies?
I think the first set of choices will happen by governments. But how the governments react, I think, will be a function of the technology that's in front of them and also public opinion and all of these things. I think the second thing, the AI ecosystem, is probably going to be a combination of governments and companies. I mean, certainly right now, whether we have an open or closed set of models is like basically up to Mark Zuckerberg because they're like the one provider of frontier open source models. Although Mistral is catching up, but I don't think they're as open as Llama. So there's some ways in which it's a decision by companies, but like there's also the kind of regulatory situation, right?
What's your position on that? Because there's some things going against in some sense, right? It's on one sense you're saying, want governments to control everything. On the other hand, saying want companies.
Well, right. So I really don't want nationalized AI. Like that seems just really easy to abuse by the government. Yeah, like I don't want to give the government like mass surveillance capabilities. I don't think there's any government in the world that I would trust with that. I mean, that's just my personal like convictions. I could believe that I'm wrong, but that's like my intuition. I guess what I probably would like is in some ways a more decentralized ecosystem. So I think the development of AI models will probably continue to be somewhat centralized. Like I don't think you're going to have like 50 different actors because these things are just very expensive. But can we have it so that the understanding and steering of AI systems and the deployment is more decentralized? Right now, a lot of the expertise and access needed to kind of evaluate and understand frontier AI systems, especially pre-deployment, is kind of just at companies. Some of that is because of an access question. Some of that is just because like outside groups haven't really built up the capacity to do really good evaluations. There's some groups starting to do this. I'm currently on leave from Berkeley, starting a group trying to do this. So it's definitely a thing like very close to my heart. But I think that's kind of going to be an important part of the solution is even if development is centralized, we need like analysis and discussion to be decentralized. Will?
So when we get to the point in technology where even non-frontier models can cause catastrophes in different ways, like cyber attacks and building super viruses, pocket nukes, whatever, how plausible do you think it is that the offense-defense balance on every single one of these problems is going to allow for people to have access to these models? And if it's not plausible, then how do we continue to have an open society?
That's a good question.
Should we schedule this talk at the end so we could go to a bar?
I guess I could say why I feel optimistic, but it's a very like pressing question. I'm optimistic because of my personality, maybe, yeah. So one is I think there will be a transition period between now and then where we'll also have like very good AI systems for empowering humans and for kind of, hopefully playing defense. I agree that there's probably going to be some cases where like offense would beat defense. What I'm hoping is that we can identify that subset of things and like, yeah, maybe we need to lose like a bit of civil liberties in those domains. Like maybe there's certain materials that should be really hard to buy, which is already the case, but maybe like, you make that like one step harder. I think that's kind of the optimistic world is that yes, sometimes offense beats defense. It's in a narrow set of domains. We come up with targeted interventions to address those rather than blanket interventions to just like shut down everything. But I don't know. Maybe that's unavoidable. I just want to try to get it. Yes.
Sticks to manage AI. What would be the carrots that you would like to see in industry or government to like, encourage better behavior or like good solutions for the democracy?
Yeah. So I guess I kind of think that the sort of like open ecosystem for understanding models is probably a carrot for companies if done right. So I don't think any company wants to be on the hook for being able to like certify like, did I make a good decision or not in how I built this model and deployed it, like that just, I mean, one, it's a lot of work. Two, it's like a huge liability thing. Like I think decentralizing that is actually probably good for companies. OpenAI is already starting to do this. They're trying to create their own kind of decentralized network of red teamers. So that I guess would be one carrot. I think the other, the related thing is it just helps make systems better if we understand them better. So I don't know, maybe that's not a complete answer, but like I kind of see it, I kind of see the open world as kind of good for everyone if we can get there.
Yeah, do you think it's hopeless to try to build a population immunity to some of the risks that you were,
I think so. I mean, that's also like, so I think so, but like we have to be careful, right? So often population immunity is built up by like kids growing up with the technology and getting used to it. So people like us might be kind of screwed because we won't have the community or we won't have the immunity. But maybe our kids will be okay. So maybe it's fine. I think there's some things that can be transmitted just kind of mimetically where, the idea of fake news, like that has kind of, most people have that idea, even if we didn't grow up with it. But I also think that kids are probably much better at recognizing fake news than we are. So I do think you can get immunity. That's kind of part of the counter-adaptation idea. But I guess you want it via like inoculation rather than just like everyone gets it.
so what is done on the vaccine?
So I think if you can one is if you can create like really convincing demos of some of the things happening in the future so that people understand what's happening. I think that might help. I don't know if those would be viral enough, right? But it's like, suppose that you could have like created a demo of this like deep fake video call and had like lots of people understand that this is a thing that could happen and it like feels very like visceral. Then maybe this person wouldn't have gotten fooled. So I think kind of demonstrations of these problems is actually something that we as academics can potentially do that will help.
So maybe just piggybacking off that question, I remember, in middle school, for example, you have things like you have shop and you have home economics, they teach you outdated things like how to balance a checkbook.
Yeah.
I mean, are there ways in which we can imagine like, having education percolate to people so they understand a bit better about the risks of these kinds of things?
I think Les Valiant had a whole idea of how to teach about propaganda in history, about all these points in history where propaganda really shifted the way like in the French Revolution with the printing about Marie Antoinette's.
I mean, most revolutions were, yeah.
And so it's like to show them these examples, even in the history classes, and then in real, so that the people would watch out for them and realize.
Yeah, I wonder if you could also program like GPT and Claude to like, with probability 1%, they just like try to convince you of something totally false, but then afterwards they tell you. Yes.
So one possible direction towards solving these deep fakes and those things would be kind of to move towards like a really strong authentication system. It's like watermark, like discussed tomorrow, would be one thing. Again, but other kind of inclusive things where maybe everybody like goes as like a public key and everything we say is signed in and like make a hypothetical thing. Do you think this is a plausible direction, or it's like too much like of civil liberties or other problems like making sure everything is really properly authenticated?
I think digital identity is like a pretty. I mean, I should also say like I'm just giving off the cuff answers. Like these are like it's an extremely broad set of questions that I'm like an expert in basically none of them, but I've at least talked to a lot of experts in all of these areas, so I could say random things that might be right. I think digital identity is probably like a pretty useful part of the solution. I mean, there's ways of doing that are not like super authoritarian, right? Like you give people the ability to authenticate themselves if they want to, while also, being able to remain anonymous when they want to, then you're on a video call with your CFO and like there's a box saying like this person might not actually be your CFO because they like didn't digitally authenticate their identity. That's like seems pretty powerful. Like I think that is probably like a
As soon as you're already doing it, there is like this crystal transparency, to keep transparency kind of things. So in principle, that company probably didn't do a proper kind of thing to allow this whole thing.
Right. All right, so thanks everyone for the super interesting discussions. Let's try and take a break and we'll